Hey guys, Eric and Yelly again. Hope everybody's safe in this snowstorm. It seems to be getting all over the country. We only got a couple inches, but everything's shut down. So yesterday, I still have Nancy's tracks in the garage. It's just too snowy out there to do anything, and I figured I just want to take a minute. There's probably the most effective misfire finding method that I've ever seen, and it's a Ravi fix. If you watch his channel, it's just using two channels, and it's a very good way to find a misfire. I mean, I in minutes I found a miss on this tracks. I did a couple experiments, confirmed it was the right cylinder. What happened is every now and again you just feel that little fish bite misfire, no codes, nothing. I mean, it would just be. I first noticed it like when the AC would kick on because the defrosters were on the car. You could almost feel it in the steering wheel, like, a little shudder whenever that compressor kicked. So I figured that's good way to try this test, and it worked. It identified the cylinder. I changed all four plugs, but before, just to confirm it was the right cylinder, I put one brand new plug in one, and then the miss went away. I changed the other three plugs, ran it again, and mist stayed away. So it's very fast. Now, that's the good news. The bad news is I was going to try it on a couple of my other scopes to see if it works. And since then, on a comment on Ravi's page, or his YouTube channel rather, he said it works on pico and Hscope. I found out the hard way. The Hscope's the only scope I got that'll run it, which is a great thing. But in the end, if you're looking for a scope, this is one good way to do it, and it's pretty much the cheapest scope is the one that did it. So let me just show you what I got. I'll do a little explaining as I go. A lot of you guys already seen this. If you use Hscope already, you know Ravi's site. I mean, he's very good with Hscope. I mean, one of the best guys with Dennis and Martin himself. I mean, they really know this program, and it was a neat trick. But what I figured is if it worked on Hscope, on the newer, the Mixig Vado, that should have been a no, I wasn't even doubting it. I wanted to try it on the Hantek, the 1008C, even though I knew this wouldn't work. I mean, I wanted to see if Hscope would have helped it in pages mode, something like that. But, it didn't work. So I quickly, after I found it, I wanted to see if I could confirm it with the Vado, see if I could do the same test. And the math channel's just not that great on the Vado. I mean, it's there. It has some audio functions. I'll show you what I mean. But the first thing is this scope won't do it. This scope can't do it. This scope won't do it. This scope won't do it. This is the only one that did. So, I mean, that's great news for it. But it's, to me, with all these scopes, now I know which one, I'd use for this test. But if you're looking into, finding a scope, these are the ones that I got. These are the ones I tried it on. And, the only effect is that one. Okay, guys, I just wanted to show you. I was going to do like, what it looked like on all these different scopes, but being's the only one it worked on for me is the same video as Ravi fixes. I mean, definitely go watch his video. This man's a genius with Hscope. And the thing for this test, all you need is any kind of ignition signal. I use just the signal going to the mono coil. I couldn't get well, I could have got secondary. I knew where the signal pinout was, and you could use primary, whatever, as long as you could sync one channel. You keep your time. I put it on 1 second of division, and as he recommends, the rate, at least 150. I tried it on 300. It looks pretty good, but 150, it doesn't look like there's nothing wrong with that either. I mean, that's what I actually found a misfire with. Now you have 6.5 minutes, 6 minutes, 24 seconds at a time. What I did was just listen for the misfire, keep restarting it until you feel that little fish bite. And the main thing, guys, going after these is turn the loads on, turn the AC on, turn everything on. I mean, you don't want to do it like an alternator charging test, but sometimes that's what it takes to bring it out. But especially with the AC compressor running, that's where the misfires usually show up. If they're, just like that little hidden one that's not setting any monitors, not changing the fuel trim fast enough, or, anything that would be, because you could go from ignition to ignition trying to find a misfire. If you have a 4-cylinder, you have to watch all 4 of them ignitions till you find the one it is. That's what makes this such a deadly test, to just pinpoint which cylinder is firing, or which one is misfiring, rather. And now the cool part. Like, whenever I show you on here, you see how the time is still there, but the sample rate's not here. That's why I wanted to show you this has to be at least 150. Now, all we do now that we have the waveform here, you want to take the math channel, go to frequency. Now my crankshaft position sensor, it's the pink trace there. You want to go to the frequency of channel 2. And then, you could even get rid of the signal now if you want. But this should be a relatively straight line going across, because this is measuring the frequency of how fast the crankshaft's spinning. So instead of looking up here, we're looking down here at the top of this line. And remember, 6.5 minutes at a time you have to run. And you see, as that line starts to crumble, the misfire was causing the crankshaft to slow down. Now that we know that, this is what's really nice about Hscope. We could shut off what's given us the most glare there, the actual crankshaft position. So now what we do, I was on channel 1, the ignition. So what I'm going to do is just put on the cylinder identifiers. Now we could zoom in a little bit. But you see how this has every one, and this is the trick that Ravi stresses. Make these towers as high as you can, and it's easier to see. You see how every cylinder has an arc. And then whenever we get down to this one cylinder that's going down, that's where we want to come close. You could go to the one before it to line up the identifiers. Oh, actually, my cylinders. One, 3, 4, 2. Now my cylinder identifiers, I could line this up. Now this is the signal. I'm going to just leave it on the leading edge. Then I'm going to line this with the leading edge. So we know this is number 1. Now, whenever we look at these arcs, we could see there's a nice clean arc in between every cylinder. Even though it picks up the notch on the crankshaft sink, it's still an arch. And then another arch. In between every cylinder, there's a perfect arch if it fired. Now, when we get down to this number 1 firing, this arch goes up where number 1 was supposed to fire. The line goes straight down diagonally. Number 1 was the cylinder that I replaced the plug first, and this went away. I replaced the other 3 plugs because, that's what you're supposed to do. And, I'm not going to put 1 plug in a vehicle.
But just to confirm, after I replaced number one plug, they all looked about the same. But after I replaced number one plug, now this problem didn't come back. And again, this was only with the AC on. And even though the crankshaft slowed down right after this miss, there's still a perfect arch. And in between cylinder 2 and 4, we still have an arch and an arch. And then whenever number 1 misses again, straight down. And then between 3 and 4, we have that arch back. So just watching these arcs and thinking what it's actually telling you is actually whenever the crankshaft is slowing down, that's what we're picking up. And that's a good bit of, I don't know what I want to call it. I mean, it's just a fast way to find which one's missing on you. Now, I was hoping any scope with a math channel could have did this, but in the end, it's Hscope's the only one that did it. Now, he commented that Pico also does this. But I was thinking for, is new compared to some of the other scopes that the Vado is, that the mix they get would be able to do this too, but not so much. But it's a great trick because you'll always find what cylinder's missing with 2 channels. Now, I have not tried this on the V8 yet, but you could see the cylinder identifiers are lined up pretty perfect here, but after your miss, they're not lined up. That's because the crankshaft slowed down because of that one misfire. When here they're lined up, the crankshaft slowed down, so that's going to throw your cylinder identifier off. So if you move down, you're going to want to move these with you. But you want to center them. What I did is, to make it real easy, was just do the 2 right before the misfire. See, these ones are good. So if you line number one here, number 1 here, this is before the misfire, and then it's going to show you right after. But see, whenever the line's small, it's harder to see. Well, let me get rid of these identifiers altogether. But you see how if you keep this shallow, it's hard to see. You want the towers tall. And then it's very easy to see this pattern, which stayed the same whenever it's not missing. As soon as that misfire occurs, you got it. So that's just taking a 2-channel scope, adding the math channel, and you're using this like a 3rd channel. And it works very good for this. He also did say it works on a Pico. I don't know what other scopes it works on, but that's a great trick. And now I'll show you real fast what the other 2 scopes did. Because this is just a screenshot from the Vado, because unfortunately that's the only way you could save. You could save as a reference file, but there's nothing I could do with a reference file on my own, not connected to the car, taking math channel readings. It's a different kind of animal altogether. It's what I find. I like the MIXIG, just under the hood. If you need 4 channels, if you absolutely have to have more than 2. But I found the misfire with Hscope before this scope even self-calibrated. It takes 19 minutes in the cold for this scope to zero. You zero it with no leads attached, and you just leave it calibrate itself. It took 19 minutes from turn on time to shut off time. I found the misfire in under 18 minutes with Hscope. So it's just a little back and forth. I like this for certain things, but I thought this was going to be a no-brainer. This scope could definitely do it. This is the same signal. Now, under the double wave, we only got addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. These won't work. We need frequency. So the only other thing under the FFT, this is more for audio. So we're not getting that line, unless I'm using this completely wrong, but I don't think so, guys. Nothing on it would get this red line on the math channel to even acknowledge the sync mark on the crankshaft position sensor. You could zoom in, you could see it, but the math channel would not follow it. And that's kind of what we're going with, is the role of this. What we see up here were them little arcs that we were looking for with Hscope. The math channel's just taking an average of that, and it's telling you when it's slowing down. Possibly, you could use vertical cursors and measure the frequency, but no, I mean, that this was something I was hoping that the math channel would be just as easy as Hscopes to use. And it's kind of a letdown, but you know, to me, I like them both. If you're looking for one particular scope, this is definitely something to take note of, because that is a very, very good test. I mean, as quick as it worked for me, I'm the kind that I usually like the scope. I like seeing the ignition. If I want to see a misfire, if I want to see if it's lean, if I want to see if it's rich, I'm going after the actual secondary. And, you know, it's kind of hard to diagnose a misfire that only occurs once every 18 minutes. You know, but not with Hscope and 2 channels. Against my better judgment was a 1008C. I kind of knew it didn't have the resolution for this, but I know Hscope does help it. So what you have to do to get any kind of resolution is shorten the time frame a little bit. Now this is pages mode. All this information that you see on the bottom is in here. It's you just have to zoom in more. Being the 1008C has such a small memory buffer, it's only able to capture at this resolution this much of a page. But on most things, like I've recently learned on CAN bus, this don't matter. That's when these page modes are good. Looking for a misfire with a math channel, the page modes not so much, because what happens is it picks up in between the pages like a sync notch. We'll just go with the same frequency in number 2. Now you see the red down the bottom. We're still seeing that marks, but we're missing a couple. The resolution doesn't go high enough. I was a little bit under, I believe it was around 1,000. It wasn't quite up to the 1,500, but it was as close, because the next one was 2,000, and then that was half of this page per screen. But you're seeing what's happening. The math channel, this is what we were looking for with the HS512, but it's picking up the gap. So it's changing the frequency of the math channel. And even in between that, it's a little bit unusable how whenever we make the columns taller, we see the resolution issues with the 1008C. The 1008C has no problem getting this signal in the crankshaft position sensor. I mean, it looks really good even in, you know, without pages mode, but it's just, it's page mode so far for me. I found a CAN bus. I mean, I always wondered what it was for, what I would need to go into pages mode for, but that's when you really see the resolution you need for CAN bus. So everything does have its place and its time. Ravi fixes method, you know, that it's a little bit, you need too much resolution than the 1008C can deliver. So unfortunately, I was hoping that being that was only 2 channels, I was going to have a little bit of good news for the people that do have the 1008C, because, you know, it's only 2 channels. It might be something that made it a little bit more of a valuable tool. But in the end, out of all them scopes, the HS512 is the only one that delivered. I mean, it's It is what it is, but I know which one I'm going to use to find a misfire in the future. I mean, if the crankshaft position sensor is easily available, that would be the key with this one. But this was a 4-cylinder. I haven't tried it with a 6-cylinder. I haven't tried it with an 8-cylinder. That's going to be interesting. See if it gets a little bit busier in there and see if we could still see that downward slope. We're getting 4 even arcs with a 4-cylinder. But the crankshaft, we're going to have just as many teeth with 2 or 4 more cylinders. So it might be a little bit different. But on a 4-banger, this is the method, guys. This is the RC test I did on Nancy's tracks. Before, when I did that, I did a charging test on it. The battery seemed pretty weak. It was going down below 8, just a little bit below 8. On an oscilloscope, 8 volts is the lowest you want to go. So this car, since it was wrecked, it wasn't moving around. I moved it in and out a couple times, so that's not good on a battery. I mean, it still hasn't been charged, just going down the block. So what I did was the best real world test we did. On the charging test, this thing was charging like 14.6. So we know the alternator's good. The battery was taking a charge. The current was going back into the battery. I gave it the best real world test you could give it. I charged it up. I let it sit outside for 3 days in blizzard conditions, or well, heavy snowstorm conditions and cold, and then did not start it until I did all the body work. The first thing I did was I hooked up the RC test, did it. Now this is 3 days in real world. The battery didn't go down 8. So, the battery's a little bit weak, but, if you don't have the money for it right now, 8.44 on an oscilloscope, that's good. And that's going to be the same thing as when she has it at home, parked outside, 3 days in the freezing cold. And usually here in Pennsylvania, this is a battery, I'd say if it makes it through the winter, it's probably going to go all summer till it gets cold again. But that was the good news on that, at least for her, because she's disabled. I want to make sure you definitely, if that went down below 8 again, whether somebody's disabled or not, I feel it's my responsibility to tell them, hey, this thing might leave you. But in this case, say your battery's, it's getting there, but, right now, it's still good. But what I found, the main reason I want to do an RC test on it is these are known for the number 1 cylinder cracking, or the piston cracking. So if we have a cracked piston in there, got 1,000 miles on it. But for a 91,000 mile Chevy Trax, that's a pretty good RC test. There's nothing wrong with this, so that makes me feel good. And when you know this much about a car, it's good to know. You want to know the thing got compression very fast. And if you watch my last video with Ronnie's solenoid, why every time I hear that PT Cruiser starting, it's cold, I'm thinking one of these times. Now that's a good looking solenoid there. You could say, if anything, it didn't latch once, but then it latched. And see how straight down the voltage is? Let me get the amperage back up here. And the amperage is almost a perfect straight line. So when that thing went down to 8.4, nice cold, the starter's drawing almost 400 amps, which is, about right. Freezing cold oil, freezing cold engine. You could see in the amperage, the solenoid. I'd call that one good miss. But, I'll post the picture of Ronnie's after this just so you could compare. But that's a good looking solenoid. Because Ronnie's was clicking almost the whole way across. But even if, these tests are so important to know the compression, if you're going after a drivability problem, something like that. But this is the amp clamp. This is just 2 alligator clips on the battery. The amp clamp helps you tell how many amps the battery's drawing on the inrush. And if you let this run, would be on the negative side of the amperage whenever it was charging. It would be putting the voltage back into, pushing it back into the battery. Your voltage will go up and your amperage will go down. And the battery will be charged. But that's just, the amperage helps you for that. But the main thing is if you only have alligator clips and no amp clamp, you could still do this test either way because you're seeing the same thing. First, let me just invert the amp clamp. This is the amp clamp channel 2. So you're seeing the same thing. You're not really testing the inrush amperage, but you are testing the inrush voltage. So if you just had 2 alligator clips, that's the yellow channel, you could just shut off. That would be like shutting this off. That's all you'd have. Do you still have a good relative compression test? Absolutely. Can you still check the battery? Absolutely. Can you still see what's going on with the solenoid? Absolutely. Can you see what the alternator's putting out as it charges and runs? Absolutely. In this case, I didn't let it run, so we're staying at 12. If it would have started, the voltage would have went up. That's the charging test. So you could learn a lot with just 2 alligator clips and voltage. And this with Hscope, this is straight up 12 volt. It does have AC coupling, and a lot of guys use AC coupling for the relative compression test. I really don't see a reason to. That gives me plenty to see and plenty to measure. So that's it, guys. I just wanted to show you that real quick, and I did take care of that because the battery at that time, it just didn't have enough to do the RC test. But I didn't want to let that car go without doing an RC test. When you read like specific engine's main problem or one of its known problems, and you could see it, may as well take a peek.
Well, guys, I hope you found that a little bit interesting. But I mean, if you go to Ravi Fix's YouTube page, he has so many, very, very good tests using Hscope, using a couple different scopes. But one thing about this test, whenever I seen it on his, he kind of underestimates it. I would have, but he says he uses it. He says it's a very good test, but to me, it's actually, I was very impressed with it. That's why I came out here. I figured that's a good test. I'm going to use it again. I know I'm going to use it on the HS512 and Hscope again. I wanted to see what other of my scopes would do that test. I did have full confidence in the Mixig Vado, and that math channel, it wouldn't. I've tried everything on it, but maybe there is something that I'm missing on it. The Hantek, the 1008C, we kind of knew whenever resolution's key that's not for a very fast signal or for a lot of time, and semi-fast signal. The Modus, I just figured because of its age, but I had to plug it in. I had to try. I want to know for myself whenever I want to use this method. Sometimes you might not be able to get to the crank position sensor. Sometimes even to get to the ECM, these things are, you have to actually cut off shrink wrap. You have to do, if I could go for secondary or primary there, I might, dabble there, but at least, you could fall back on it. It's a very good, if you could get to the crank position sensor, that's all you need, that and a sync. So, that's a great test. I had to figure it out for myself just on the scopes I have. So if any of you guys are considering these, that's either a plus or a minus for you. But I'd consider this test that, I'd grade it very high as far as a diagnostic test is, because a pulse sensor, first look sensor, they're very fast too, but they can be confusing. You have to time your misfire. You have to know by how many cylinders. This is the the first cylinder that doesn't fire, it slows down the crank. There's your miss. I mean, it went right to that cylinder. It's not the firing event before it that didn't happen. It's the very next one that slows down the crank. That's it. So that's a very good test. I hope you understood like how it is. I mean, it's very simple to understand. I'd try it. Try it. Next misfire you get, if you could get that crank position sensor and you have Hscope and like, you know, an HS 502 or a 512 max or a pico, go do it. So, I mean, if you haven't yet, you'll like it. All right, guys, thanks a lot for watching. Stay safe in this snow, man. I think it's hitting everybody. All right, thanks for watching, guys. Adios.